Welcome to The Ritual Nurse, where healing meets humor, science, and a touch of magic. Hi, welcome back to the Ritual Nurse podcast. This is Reva, your ritual nurse and the host of the podcast. In last week's episode, we talked about the science behind why the methods that I'm giving you works. And it's going to be more important than ever that you understand the science behind why it works and the fact that it does, because all of those methods are going to be really, really important in the time ahead. So this is episode 5, and well, we're going to do a reality check. A lot has happened in between now and when I recorded episode 4. So in all honesty, I recorded episode 4 probably a good week before it launched. And in between episode 4 launching and now, there's been some really significant changes, especially for those of us nurses in the United States. So we're going to take a look at it. Now, I'm not going to rehash everything that has occurred and list everything off, not because I don't want to. I am actually a very vocal advocate. However, it's because in every other form of social media surrounding you, you've been bombarded by it over and over and over again. And that's not what we're going to do in this podcast. In this podcast, we're actually going to reaffirm a few things. We are going to reestablish that common ground that we have as nurses. And we're going to discuss some very real, very tangible ways to protect our peace and to protect our mental health. So one of the things that we do have to talk about is we got to do a reality check. We got to talk about what's happening and why it matters to us as nurses. So there have been quite a number of things, really kind of a deluge of things coming down that are impacting healthcare and impacting populations, especially for our Black, Indigenous, people of color, our LGBTQI+, and especially our transgender patients. Now, regardless of your political or otherwise affiliations, perspectives, or beliefs, our one common ground that all of us share is that we're nurses. And in that regard and in that respect, our patients are our patients. So the nurse-to-patient therapeutic relationship comes with professional and ethical responsibilities and boundaries. And that level playing field is what we're here to reaffirm. Because these political and social issues directly affect and impact our patient care environments, patients' access to care, the quality of care available to patients, and in many cases, they actually deny patients medical care. So in nursing, we have always dealt with systemic barriers in healthcare, social determinants of health, socioeconomic statuses, and the systemic barriers in healthcare, like racism, transphobia, and other forms of oppression, they show up insidiously in healthcare in everything from implicit bias to outright denial of medical care at both a policy and insurance statute level. Now, for some nurses, political advocacy is something that they enjoy and that they engage in. And for others, they don't. And both are okay. So in the show notes and on the website, I am going to have a list of resources and organizations that those of you who do engage in political advocacy and action can get more information, can connect with, find intersection with. And if that's not you as a nurse and you don't want to engage in political advocacy in that level, that's okay. We're going to continue talking about what we do as nurses and where that commonality lies, and it doesn't have to involve conflict. So that's okay. No matter which type of nurse you are in that regard, either of them are okay. The other thing that I want to acknowledge, however, is our emotions. So right now, regardless of your perception, regardless of your affiliation, So many of you are feeling frustration, are feeling fear, you're scared, are feeling anger. And so many of us are experiencing a vast array of emotions, strong and deep emotions, and they're valid. Every single one of the emotions that you are feeling are completely valid. This is a challenging and heartbreaking time, no matter what your perspective is. It doesn't even matter whether you're in the United States or not. This is a challenging and heartbreaking time, and your feelings, every single emotion, is valid. And nurses, well, we've always been the frontline advocates for patient well-being and safety. Nurses have always been associated with therapeutic well-being. This is connected to all of our core nursing values and ethics. Now, speaking of our ethics, I'm going to refresh our memory a little when it comes to nursing professional responsibility and our ethical duty. So the American Nurses Association, the ANA Code of Ethics, has several provisions that discuss this. And provision 1 is a respect for human dignity. Nurses practice with compassion and respect for every person's intrinsic worth, regardless of background or status. Provision 2, it's a commitment to the patient. Nurses' primary commitment is to the patient, requiring nurses to safeguard patients' rights and interests, including and especially those of vulnerable populations. Provision 3, advocacy and protection. Nurses promote, advocate for, and protect the health, safety, and rights of the patient. This provision explicitly addresses the nurse's role in mitigating harm and advocating for equitable care. I've said this so many times. You can have all the fancy mouth words you want about equality, but if you don't have equity, it means nothing. Provision 8 is collaboration for human rights and health diplomacy. This provision encourages nurses to collaborate with other healthcare professionals and the public to address social, economic, and environmental determinants of health, aiming directly to reduce disparities and uphold social justice. The International Council of Nurses, the ICN Code of Ethics, standard Nurses and People. This stipulates that nurses respect human rights, including cultural rights and the right to life and choice, and that we provide care without prejudice. Nurses and the profession. This standard calls on nurses to sustain the values of the profession through advocacy and leadership in shaping social and health policies that promote equitable care. We have principle-based bioethics. This was first voiced by Beauchamp and Childress in 1979, and it's been revised repeatedly since then, just strengthening each one of these principles. They'll be very familiar to you, I think. Autonomy, recognizing each patient's right to self-determination, which includes advocating for marginalized individuals whose autonomy might be undermined by systemic barriers. Beneficence and non-maleficence. This requires nurses to act in the best interest of patients and avoid causing harm, particularly important for those at risk due to discrimination or inadequate access to care. And justice. This demands fairness in distributing resources and care. This principle underscores the duty to address health inequities and advocate for policies that protect vulnerable populations. All of our frameworks involve social determinants of health, social justice, health equity. We recognize that factors like socioeconomic status, race, gender identity, and immigration status directly affect our patients' access to care. Nurses have an ethical responsibility to address these determinants. Our population health approach as nurses emphasizes systemic advocacy. This pushes for structural changes that improve health outcomes for entire communities, especially those that are historically marginalized. All of our professional organizations and standards incorporate ethical mandates to protect and advocate for at-risk groups within their guidelines and certification standards. You see this in all of our state boards of nursing and oaths of licensing and specialty organizations. And institutional policies follow suit. Hospitals, clinics, academic institutions, they all often align their own codes of conduct with broader nursing ethics, reinforcing our mandate to serve and protect vulnerable patients. Across all these ethical frameworks, one through line is clear. Nurses must serve as vocal, active advocates for their patients, especially those who face systemic disadvantages. Upholding these ethical mandates means confronting bias, championing equity, and continuously striving to create a healthcare environment that honors the dignity and rights of every single individual. Now, advocacy can be as simple as simple daily activities. For example, learning a patient's pronouns. Now, I don't want to hear that you don't use pronouns. You're a registered nurse, a healthcare professional. You are educated enough and intellectual enough to recognize that we use pronouns every single day in almost everything we say. If you use the words I, it, she, he, you, they, those are all pronouns. And simply understanding the use of pronouns and how they're tied to respect for patients is such a small act. But if that's how you conduct yourself in your professionalism and your ethical obligations with your patients, then that sends them a very clear signal that you have fidelity in your nursing ethics and your commitment to equity in treating them. It does nothing and takes away nothing from you to learn a patient's chosen pronouns. It absolutely does nothing to you if your patient named Sally wants to use the pronouns he, him, and that's how he's most comfortable being addressed. All that does is demonstrate to him as a patient that his rights, his autonomy, his sovereignty as a person is respected and valued by you as a nurse, point blank. There's still other subtle but consistent steps that uphold patient dignity and rights for those who really don't enjoy conflict and don't try to seek conflict out. You don't have to be a political advocate or an activist to do any of these things. You just have to practice at the top of your license and to the top of your nursing professionalism and ethical and your ethical duties and responsibilities. So the number one method of having consistent steps that uphold patient dignity is having absolute equity. Treat every single patient no differently than you would treat a VIP patient. Every single one. Same access, same treatments, same consideration, same therapeutic approach, same compassion and empathy. If you treat your patients with that kind of equity and professionalism, there's no room for bias or discrimination. We have a historical legacy of advocacy. This is just something that is part of us as a nursing profession. From Florence Nightingale, her public health reforms and reform in hospital conditions benefited the underserved of her areas. You have Lillian, Wald, and Mary Brewster. They opened the Henry Street settlement in New York City. They provided healthcare and education to immigrant and impoverished communities. Their work laid the groundwork for public health nursing and established a strong precedent for serving those most in need. Even activists like Harriet Tubman and others, many historical figures who performed nursing duties, officially or unofficially, specifically served marginalized populations, reminding us that nursing and nursing activities at their core have always been about social justice and equality. And through the ages, we have just continued to advance that. We have a core mandate to advocate from the earliest 20th century to modern era. Nurses have consistently been called to uphold ethical principles that protect our most vulnerable patients. This is not a new concept. This is a long-established professional standard, and it's integrated into all of our professional codes. The American Nurses Association Code of Ethics has continuously evolved to emphasize justice, respect, and the reduction of health disparities. Even decades ago, these codes urged nurses to combat discrimination in any form. Self-work and self-awareness is just part and parcel of our professional responsibility. Addressing your personal bias is a non-negotiable as a nurse. We have to acknowledge that in the past, societal biases often overshadowed healthcare for marginalized groups. However, us as a nursing profession have grown in our commitment to inclusion and equity. The individual, you can hold personal beliefs and affiliations, but your personal beliefs have no place in your professional practice. The professional role of a nurse demands impartial, equitable care for every single patient, regardless of race, gender identity, sexual orientation, or religious affiliation. Those of us that have been practicing, that are experienced, that are seasoned nurses, we have to recognize that as a nursing profession, we've continued to evolve towards greater equity and equality, and that maintaining personal bias at the bedside goes against the very heritage of nursing advocacy. It goes against what we stand for. We have to uphold tradition while evolving forward. It is our stewardship and our responsibility to carry on the legacy of those who fought already for inclusivity and justice in both social arenas and in healthcare. We have to pass the torch. We have to encourage mentoring newer generations with these ethical principles in mind, learning from them, their ability to intersect these inherently important principles and aspects, and ensuring that our profession continues to protect the disadvantaged communities and marginalized populations. We have shared accountability. We are all responsible for educating one another, for challenging old biases, and ensuring that the next chapter of nursing history is one marked by an unwavering commitment to equity and equality. Now, I know that normally we've already hit our 15-minute break, and we're a few minutes over. But this episode is just that important. So right now we are going to take a little bit of a break. This is our pause point. For those that have to return to shift, I wish you the quickest shift with the most delightful orders from your residents and physicians. And I'm not going to say the Q word, but we will see you when you are done with shift or on your next break. For those that are going to stick around, just hang on for the few seconds of musical interlude here. Pause, go hydrate, go get a cup of coffee, stretch, and we'll see you back here very shortly. All right, so welcome back. Right now, we are going to focus on you. So we really kind of delved hard into our common lifeline of being nurses and what it means to be a nurse. But how do you do that right now? That's a very real question. How do we do that right now? And one of the ways that we protect our peace and protect our mental health is by learning how to set boundaries. So there's kind of a stigma that I've noticed on social media lately, and I don't know. I don't know if it's a driving need for validation. I don't know if it's a driving need for human connection and not feeling alone because of the overwhelming emotions and fear. But there's a stigma that I've noticed that if you're not loud enough or active enough, that somehow it indicates that you're not doing enough or that you've given up. And nothing could be further from the truth. If you don't protect your peace and protect your mental health, you can do nothing for others. So, why do these boundaries matter? These boundaries allow us as nurses to sustain our mental health while performing in high stress situations and patient care roles and being in environments of emotional volatility. Having personal limits helps prevent burnout and compassion fatigue, which are critical to the success of doing what we do as nurses. How the heck do you set boundaries when it comes to the topic of the past week and a half and everything happening on social media? Let me tell you. So there's several different kinds of boundaries. There's physical boundaries. What does that mean? That means knowing when to step away from workplace discussions, family discussions, friend discussions, or even social media feeds when they become overwhelming. In episodes 2 and 3, we walked through some actual routines, some actual practices of becoming self-aware, of setting intentional space so that you can discover your emotional state in the context of what's affecting you. And the more that you practice that, the more you're able to discern when you need to step away from these discussions or these environments. And that's setting a physical boundary. Affirm to yourself that when you find yourself in this environment or these discussions or social media feeds and things start to become overwhelming, you start to notice those signs and signals of that fight or flight response, the escalated heart rate, faster breathing rate, your increased respirations, anxiety, clenched jaw, tense shoulders, clenched hands, changes in temperature regulation. You need to affirm for yourself that as a physical boundary, you're going to physically remove yourself from that setting. There's also emotional boundaries. So engaging in self-check-ins, doing that intentional space setting and self-awareness, journaling, and especially therapy to process difficult emotions. Setting emotional boundaries for yourself looks like telling yourself, giving yourself permission to express the emotions, to have the emotions, and observe and describe without judgment. We listen without judging, especially to ourselves. When it comes to emotion, having an emotion is not wrong. We have to decide what we do with the emotion and what is the most healthy response to that emotion. So set those emotional boundaries for yourself, that you are going to check in with yourself in the morning before shift. You're going to check in with yourself mid-shift or after the shift, whatever it is that works for you to set that baseline and ground yourself. Another boundary is a digital boundary. Now, this one can be very difficult, especially because most of our generations, parts of Gen X, Zennials, Millennials, Gen Z, those of us that are old enough to be registered nurses, have an addiction to social media, have an addiction to our phones, have an addiction to doom scrolling. I mean, it even has a name, for crying out loud. So digital boundaries are setting times of day that you are absolutely disconnected, especially to the news and social media, to maintain your mental peace. Now, when you do this for yourself, depends on you. It depends on your emotional fortitude at the end of your shift or prior to your shift. It depends on where you work. If you work somewhere with a lot of emotional volatility, you want to have some blackout time zones before and after your shift. You want to have a period of time before your shift that you are not inundated with news and social media, because you want to walk into your shift with as much resilience and equilibrium as possible, so that the exposure to secondary trauma, emotional volatility doesn't impact you as profoundly as it might if you were already impacted by overwhelm and news media feeds and social media. Or it could be after your shift. If you've worked a really long shift and you're approaching compassion fatigue, inundating yourself with the news and social media is the last thing you need to do in order to restore that sense of mental health balance and protect your peace. So decide for yourself what parts of the day, what times of the day you need to have these blackout zones and disconnect from news and social media during those time periods. Make that commitment to yourself to set these boundaries. You can stay informed without being inundated, okay? And it's very important as nurses that you are informed. First and foremost, you are professional licensed healthcare professionals. Okay. You know what peer-reviewed research is. You know what unbiased sources of information are. You know what they are. So make sure that the information that you're getting is not from an echo chamber, is not from unverified sources, but that you find the most unbiased source of information here in the US, that might be outside of the US, to get your information from in brief doses to stay informed about things that might impact your ability to deliver care, that might impact your patient's ability to access care, or that might impact the policies and protocols and procedures of your workplace environment. You need to set specific times, like schedule specific news check-in times, and tell your friends and family. They're very well-meaning, but they're seeking emotional validation and reassurance and the need to trauma bond as well. And they're going to inundate you with news links and stories and reels and TikToks that are not in your best interest. So you need to let them know that you have specific times when, you're going to be checking in on news, and if they have something, super important to communicate with you about it, then that's the time to do it, because you're already engaged in looking at the bias it's coming from, if it's peer reviewed, if it's evidence-based, is it reliable? You know how to do this, and you know how to recognize those sources. The other thing I want to advocate for, especially putting you first and guarding against overwhelm and burnout and compassion fatigue, is therapy. So our professional colleagues have in their wheelhouse exposure to skill sets and tools that we as nurses do not. And you do not have to disclose to anyone that you are seeking professional help or that you are in therapy. And you should seek counseling or therapy if setting these boundaries, if overwhelm, if anxiety, if stress, if you're already at the point where you've hit compassion fatigue or burnout, because counseling and therapy with our professional colleagues allows you to engage with skill sets and tools that we're usually blind to because of our tunnel vision and because of lack of exposure, that help you navigate this emotional minefield and the turmoil of everything that's going on. So I highly advocate for my nurses to seek counseling and therapy and invest in yourself, time with our professional colleagues and their incredible skill sets for your benefit. One of the other things that's really helpful is that you have a self-care toolkit. Okay, so having an actual list of quick practices like the break room breathing that we covered, I think it was in episode 3. Guided meditations, short nature walks, other somatic practices. Make a cheat sheet. Make a list, vocalize, what you have in your self-care toolkit that can be really quick go-tos in the elevator when you're transporting a patient, in the car, in the intentional space that you create for yourself in the evening as part of your evening ritual or routine, or your morning ritual or routine. Whatever it is, make sure that you have different tools in your self-care toolkit. Episodes 2 and 3 are an excellent source to start. The self-care challenge on our Instagram is a phenomenal place. Grab one of those bingo cards and see which one of those you want to add to your toolkit. And I also recommend mental health apps. There's mental health apps from BetterHelp, BetterHelp and Calm. And there's also 988 here in the United States if you need urgent support, that are immensely helpful. We're not sponsored by any of these things. These are just tools that are out there that I'm aware of. And I also encourage you to form or join supportive communities. Stay connected with the Code team. Share our podcast, listen to our podcast with other nurses and friends, practice the techniques, practice the breath work, the somatic tips, the journaling, some of the self-care ideas with each other. The one thing I'm going to caution you against is joining a community for the purpose of trauma bonding. That is just going to lead to further emotional overwhelm, because you're taking on all of the emotional needs and trauma bonding trends of being in an echo chamber of, and it's very valid. That people are seeking, emotional ease. They're seeking validation, connection, but that's not going to help you practice to the top of your ability. So if you're going to form a support group or join a support group, make sure that they're actively engaged in support and not trauma bonding. Online forums, local nurse meetups, professional organizations, like I said, the code team itself, our community, make sure that they are actively engaged in supportive practices, in healing practices, and not in trauma bonding or emotional volatility. But peer support is just immensely, immensely helpful right now in navigating emotionally heavy times. Forge connection with your peers. An excellent thing to do would be to, listen to the podcast with peers and discuss which methods work. Try the methods together. Do grounding breath work together. The break room breathing method is, there's the box breathing and there's the 4-7-8 breathing. You can do that together. You can do it in the elevator. You can do it in the car. You can do it in the break room. You can do it on your couch with some snacks and just spend quality time, with your peers and colleagues, with trusted friends and significant others, actually prioritizing protecting your peace and protecting your mental health. You have to prioritize yourself first. Create some personal rituals that are going to ground yourself before or after your shift. Again, the self-care challenge on our Instagram, I think it's pinned as one of the highlights. The DBY method is also pinned as one of the highlights. You can use either of those to get yourself started to create personal rituals that ground you before and after your stressful shifts. That is just inherently important in being able to stay in equilibrium, to maintain your resilience. Those are actionable, free resources that you can utilize in protecting your peace and in protecting your mental health. So I know this was a really deep episode. You had to wait longer for the first 15-minute break, and we're probably going to go over our normal 30 minutes, but not by much. We have to include our favorite segment, Coffee, Crystals, and Divinations, just my favorite part of the episodes, and we need it more than ever for this week, most definitely. So when it comes to our coffee chat part, so this week, it's all about hydration, point blank. What I really want is for you to tell me in the comments on Instagram or the podcast itself what your favorite go-to is for hydration. Like, what water recipes do you absolutely love? Now, don't tell me that this is so last year, because let me tell you something. I am all about doing whatever sparks joy. And if it's a flavored water with no sugar or just the tiniest bit, I am so here for it. Hydration comes in many forms, and this is one simple, small way to just give yourself something fun, a treat even. Get a fun tumbler and make the drink. For me, it's the 0-calorie mango tangerine sparkling water with a pump or two of sour candy flavor, the Torani kind, fresh lemon or lime juice, and a healthy amount of ice. I can get 20 ounces of that down in minutes. For the naysayers, guess what? So carbonated water is just water. And also, research has shown that it does not leach anything out of your bones. Is plain water the best? Of course. Is it going to spark joy? Probably not. So do you a favor and come up with a delicious recipe that's super light on sugar, but huge on the flavor. Just give yourself a little something to smile about right now. Like I said, things that spark joy. You just need continuous little sparks here and there. Those are the kinds of things that really sustain you on those long shifts, the little smiles, the little sparks of joy. However, okay, if it's freezing and gross where you are and the thought of an ice cold bev is not the vibe, then may I suggest aromatic teas combined with a fruit extract and aromatic honey. Now, what the heck is aromatic honey, you say? Aromatic honey is honey that is made from wildflowers or things like lavender that have a mild flavor, but they have a perfumed or aromatic essence. So this is going to go heavy on the spark joy vibe, and it's also going to still be a healthy choice while hydrating you. And it's also going to provide that warm, soothing comfort that you want if things are freezing and gross where you are. like they are here where I live. So I would love a cup of lemon zinger tea, some wildflower honey, and some peach extract or nectarine. If fruit really isn't kind of your thing, you could do a spiced tea and add just a touch of oat milk for a creamy alternative to a latte. Let me know if any of these recipes take off for you. Let me know in the comments on the IG, the comments on the podcast. You can also text me, especially if any of you have some incredible water recipes out there. Hit your girl up. There's a link on the top of the podcast notes. You can click it and you can just text right to me. We're going to do our oracle divination to see what crystal we're going to work with this week. And we're going to see, especially given the week that we've had, what the oracle deck has to say about what crystal we should be carrying for protection or for inspiration. And it looks like this one is Larimar. So Larimar, again, I think I discussed this in the last podcast. I'm pretty much a shapeshifter between a mermaid and a black cat. But Larimar is one of my most loved minerals because Larimar to me looks like a slice of the ocean. The color blue and the white ripples through it actually look like sunlight reflecting in like ocean water. So Larimar signifies purify in this deck. And the picture is just the most gorgeous picture of waves and a mermaid or whale, a tail with the Larimar stone on it. And let's read a little bit about what Larimar signifies. Now, you may be wondering if I've been doing tarot for this long, like, why am I still using the book? I advocate that you always use the book that the artist included with what they designed. Even if you are an intuitive reader, even if you've been reading for decades like I have, and you know the cards inside and out, because when the artist created the deck, the inspiration that caused them to create that deck usually has a lot to do with the interpretations and information that they include with it. So I always love seeing where the artist was coming from when they created just such a beautiful, inspired image. And for Larimar, it's tranquility, healing, and renewed outlook. Like I said, I've said this many times, the divination draws for this podcast, I'm going to have to start doing on camera because they're usually so on point. I couldn't have planned it if I tried. This says, dive into the depths of tranquility with the purifying magic of Larimar. As you banish negativity, cleanse your aura, and refresh your soul. Let go of what no longer serves you. Find your center and emerge from the depths with a renewed outlook that sparkles with positivity. That couldn't be more on point for what we need right now. That's incredible. The card is absolutely beautiful. If you don't have Larimar, apatite is a great stone that has similar properties and even looks the same. Blue calcite is another one that can often be mistaken for Larimar. Tourmaline and obsidian are more commonly, you're able to access those. And those are great stones for dealing with negative energy. And again, I know for some of you, this is a little woo-woo, but if you think about it, especially in the quantum physics sense of thinking about things, energy is a constant. And we know, as highly educated nurses and healthcare professionals, that there are some things that science just can't explain. And if carrying around a slice of what looks like the most beautiful tropical ocean in your pocket helps remind you to let go of what doesn't serve you and find your center and sink into that imagery of that beautiful ocean and protect your peace, well, then I'd say even if science has a little bit of a way to go to explain the woo-woo part of it, it doesn't really matter because we know it still works. The next thing we're going to do is our tarot divination. So we need to see what our collective guidance for the week is and what the tarot deck has to tell us. And this deck, I'm still using the Crystal Struck Tarot deck by Moonstruck Crystals. I did put a picture up on IG like I said I would, if you want to take a look at it. And this week is the 7 of Pentacles. This is optical calcite. and it is absolutely gorgeous. I don't know if you've ever seen optical calcite, but it is clear and usually has a rainbow hue. And the Seven of Pentacles. Oh my, perseverance, growth, and hard labor. Optical calcite is a stone of growth, manifestation, and it amplifies positive energy. You are almost there. You've been putting in the work, and your successful roots are showing. The efforts you've been putting in are beginning to manifest in your life, and things are growing well. Be patient and keep up the good work. Now, I know at first hearing, it's kind of like, how is that connected to the past week and a half? It is, because nursing over the decades has continued to hold the line and continued to grow, and we've established roots in equity and equality, and the work isn't over. But we've done so much hard work that right now is when our unity and common ground as nurses really shows the fruits of its labor, as we protect our patients. And most importantly, as you protect yourself, as you protect your peace and you protect your mental health. If you don't put you first, you won't be able to take care of anyone anywhere else. So, this podcast was definitely a heavy podcast. I know. And I just want to extend a really heartfelt thank you for sticking with us and for listening. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you for being my colleague as a nurse during these challenging times. I wouldn't want to do it with a better group of people. And I want to remind you that you're not alone. Together, we as nurses can create safer, more inclusive spaces for all of our patients and for each other. These populations that are affected by what's been going on are not just reflected in our patients, but they are directly reflected in each other. And we are all nurses. That is our one commonality across every other aspect of our lives that we share, is that we are all nurses. So I just want to thank you. I want to encourage you to put yourself first. I want to encourage you to prioritize your peace, to prioritize your mental health, and take care of yourself, because if you don't, we can't take care of anybody else. I love your faces, and I will talk to you next week. This is your Ritual Nurse, Riva. Thanks for tuning in to the Ritual Nurse podcast. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts, so don't forget to subscribe and stay connected. For all our social links, free education, classes, blogs, and podcast notes with resources, head over to tcth.org. Until next time, love your faces.